tends to be when there's a diminishing coming in your life. Get ready, because you have an opportunity to either fall flat on your face or win one of the greatest victories that you can imagine. As I go into what I want to share today, I want you to look at verse 5 of chapter 13. Then the Philistines gathered together to fight with Israel, 30,000 chariots and 6,000 horsemen, and people as the sand which is on the seashore in multitude. Get the picture, right? Thousands of chariots and horsemen and people, soldiers, foot soldiers, as the sand of the sea is in multitude. And then if we go down to verse 13 of chapter 14, you know the story, fill in the blanks, right? And Jonathan climbed up on his hands and knees with his armor bearer after him, and they fell before Jonathan, the Philistines did, and the armor bearer came after him and killed them. That first slaughter which Jonathan and his armor bearer made was about 20 men within about half an acre of land. Okay, say 20 men. As the sea sand on the seashore is in multitude, this is the size of the army. Thousands of chariots, thousands of horsemen, and weapons like crazy. Israel has no weapons. 2 guys defeat this entire army. But what I want you to notice today is that they began by defeating how many men? 20. Do you think that made a dent? Not in the numbers, but it sure turned to battle, didn't it? Because after the 20 men died in the plot of about half an acre, confusion came into the Philistine army, and they were killing each other, and they were running, fleeing for their lives from each other, and it was just mayhem, and Israel won a great battle that day. Starts with 20. On Sunday, Pastor Dave preached 2 great sermons, one in the Thai church about the yeast and the mustard seed. God begins in the place of weakness, of smallness, and from there works his work in our lives. Amen? Whether it's the yeast that leavens the whole lump of dough, or the mustard seed that's his tiniest of all seeds, grows up and becomes a great tree where the birds rest. And then the same idea, in a sense, on Sunday evening with David and the stones. Right? The normal stones or smooth stones, the round stones that were in the brook that didn't have any name. And this is what happens here. We see this beginning in smallness. Now, we're talking about things in the ministry, and in this ministry particularly, and how to get to where we need to be from where we are. And we are in a season of pulling up our bootstraps and making some extreme changes and adjustments to the ministry. And some people flow well with that, and other people have a difficult time with that. But I want you to know that it does start small. This great victory began with 20 people. And so if the job that we have to do is looming out in front of us, and it looks like it's as big as the number of the sand grains on the seashore, don't fear. Let's begin with 20. Amen? Let's begin with what we can. Because what happens is, if we look at the immensity of the requirements of the work we have to do, of the accomplishments that we have to make, of the exploits that we have to perform, it's like, well, why should we even start? Why should we even get out of bed in the morning? But look what 20 will do. Huh? Begin with 20, and anything can break loose. Don't begin at all, and I can guarantee you that nothing will break loose. We need to really press in for change. How we really need to, stomp our feet, make a fist, clench our teeth. We are going to change what needs to be changed. Amen? We're not here to fool around, are we? We're not here to miss the mark. We're not here to spin our wheels, waste our time. We're here to do what God has called us to do, and we are going to see it done. Amen? And so we need to start with 20. And as we're looking at the ministry, and we're looking at the goals of the ministry, and what is it that we're really trying to accomplish? And are we really doing it? And what do we need to change so that we really get to doing it? First of all, financially, some tremendous challenges. Well, what's the solution? I'm going to show you. It's time for intake into VBCI Thailand. It's time for intake into 7 weeks in Asia. And we work so hard to get one of you guys here. Huh? But we're doing it. Amen? It's a lot better than saying, well, it's just too much work. Because you know what? When we get 20, we can have as many as the numbers of the sand on the seashore. In our churches, in our ministries, in every area of the ministry, in the nursery, in the English school, in the Bible school, in the churches. One of the most important pieces of information in a church, for example, is the number of people that are coming in and staying. Are you effective? How many should you have, and how many do you have? Right? How many should we have in our churches? How many do we have? How many should we have in our Bible school, and how many do we have? This takes some serious pushing, guys. It takes some serious decision making, wanting, willing to change and say this isn't good enough, and we're going to do whatever it takes. And let's not be overwhelmed by the immensity of the change, the immensity of the financial need, the staff need, whatever it may be in your department. But let's get 20. Take 20, all heaven can break loose. Amen? In Deuteronomy chapter 7, he talks about keeping covenant and mercy with those that love him. And then in verse 13 of chapter 7, it says, he will love you and bless you and multiply you, and he will bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land and your grain and your new wine and your oil and your increase and your cattle and your offspring and your flock and all those kind of things. The land in which he swore your fathers that he would give you, you'll be blessed above all people. And we love these promises in here that God gives to his people that walk in covenant with him. We'll just skip ahead a bit to verse 21. It says, you'll not be terrified by your enemies. Okay, he's talking about taking them in and defeating the enemies. Don't be terrified, for the Lord your God, the great and awesome God, is among you. Verse 22, and the Lord your God will drive out those nations before you little by little. You will be unable to destroy them at once, lest the beasts of the field become too numerous for you. A pretty gross picture, actually. But he's saying, he says, now, you're going to go into the promised land, and all of these things that I promised you, they are going to come to pass. Don't worry about that. What I said will happen, it will happen. I'm a covenant-keeping God, and you can bank on it. But here's the process, and we're going to look at this in Exodus as well. I'm going to take you to where your enemies are. Right? I'm going to take you right into the enemy camp, and you're going to win battles beginning with 20 at a time. You're going to win battles beginning with whatever it takes at a time to win the battle. But he says it's going to be a process where it's little by little. Say little by little. Okay? Why? Little by little. Well, because the enemies are so numerous. I mean, can you imagine even where Jonathan and his armor bearer beat the Philistines? They were as numerous as the numbers of grain of sand on the sea. If they had killed all those guys and laid them flat in one day, and Israel only has 600 soldiers, what would happen? Hundreds of acres of carcasses. And no gas masks. I mean, it would be pretty gross, wouldn't it? And what he's saying here is if you defeat your enemies all at once, the wild beasts are going to increase. How are they going to increase? Because your enemies are food for them. Right? And so you have to watch this process little by little, not just because you can't handle more, well, that's a good reason, but it's because you can't defeat the enemy that quickly and survive. Because if you defeat the enemy too quickly, you won't be able to compensate for what happens on the other side of the fence, and it will come back to bite you. And so this is his process, and this is his plan to bring defeat to our enemies and to get us to where we want it to be. I want to talk about this process this morning because this is where the adjustment comes. And this is where it becomes difficult for us, difficult to grasp what it is that we need to do to get from where we are to where we want to be. And like I just shared this idea that a lot of guys have no clue. The most important information, the most important decisions, they're not equipped to make those because they don't have the information. They haven't paid attention. They don't understand the process. They don't understand the covenant. Right? If you don't understand the covenant, you'll be washed up totally. We've dealt with that a lot this last year, right? The straight up gospel. It's what God says about himself that's true. It's what God says about you that's true. It's what God says you're going to do that's true. That's what's true. Not some religion we make up ourselves. And there's so much of that going on in the world, making up our own idea about what God is and what he wants and what he likes and what he doesn't like, what he does, what he doesn't do. Come on. That's a sure recipe for failure. God is who he said he is. And he's not changing that to meet somebody's dogma or doctrine. He's already happy with himself. And it doesn't matter what you believe, it ain't going to change God. It doesn't matter how mad you get at him, it's not going to change him either.